I had been carrying the weight of that house for 11 years. Not in the way people talk about when they mean paying the mortgage or fixing the gutters, though I did both of those things. I mean the weight you can't put a number on. The kind that settles into your shoulders sometime around your mid-40s and never fully leaves. The kind that comes from watching someone you built a life with slowly stop seeing you as a partner and start seeing you as a burden. My name is Daniel Marsh. I'm 51 years old. I live in a mid-sized city in Ohio. In a house I helped pay for with 8 years of double shifts at a logistics company before I took a severance package during the restructuring and agreed mutually. We both agreed to manage the household while my wife, Claudia, focused on growing her interior design consultancy. That was 3 years ago. For the first year, everything was fine. Better than fine. Actually, Claudia's business took off faster than either of us expected, and I was genuinely proud of her. I cooked. I cleaned. I handled our son Marcus's school schedule, his soccer practices, his orthodontist appointments. I managed the contractors when we had the roof redone. I filed our taxes. I kept things running. Somewhere in the second year, the tone changed. It was subtle at first. A comment here. A look there. Claudia started referring to her income as my money in ways that felt pointed rather than casual. She started hosting client dinners without mentioning them to me until the day of / work. Then acting annoyed when I hadn't prepared anything. She began talking about her work in a way that made it clear she no longer saw what I did as equal contribution. She saw it as charity. She was extending to me. By the third year, I had become, in her mind, a dependent. I want to be clear about something. I never stopped contributing. I estimated once just for myself, not to throw in anyone's face, that the household management I handled would have cost us somewhere between $40,000 and $55,000 annually if we had outsourced it. Childcare, housekeeping, meal preparation, errand management, home maintenance, coordination. I wasn't sitting around. I was working. I just wasn't depositing a paycheck. But Claudia had stopped seeing it that way. The birthday party for Marcus was on a Saturday in April. He was turning 14. Claudia had wanted something bigger than I thought was necessary. And I had spent the better part of 2 weeks organizing it, the backyard setup, the food, the invitations, the cake from the bakery on Henderson Road, the arrangements for 11 of his friends to come over and stay through dinner. I did all of it. Her parents drove up from Columbus. Her sister Renata came with her husband. A few of Claudia's close friends were there too. Women she'd known since college. And they had this way of clustering together and talking in a register that made me feel like I was the help rather than the host. Everything went smoothly. Kids were loud and happy. The cake was a hit. Marcus looked genuinely pleased, which was all I had cared about. It was late afternoon, around 4:30. When it happened, Claudia was standing near the back patio with Renata and 2 of her friends. I had just brought out another tray of food from the kitchen sliders I had prepped myself, because the caterer we'd discussed had fallen through at the last minute and I had handled it without making a scene. I set the tray down on the table and started to fix myself a plate. Claudia looked over at me. Then she said it. "Daniel, can you not eat that? That food is for the guests. If you're hungry, go buy yourself something." The patio went quiet. Not completely. The kids were still loud in the yard. Music was still playing from the Bluetooth speaker I had set up. But the cluster of women near Claudia went still. And Renata looked down at her drink. And I felt every nerve in my body register what had just happened. She hadn't whispered it. She hadn't pulled me aside. She had said it the way you say something you've been wanting to say for a while and have finally decided you don't care who hears. I looked at her for a moment. Then I set the plate down, walked into the kitchen, and didn't come back out. I heard her laugh about something 20 seconds later. Whatever it was, it wasn't about me. Life moved on for everyone else within a minute. But I stood at the kitchen counter with my hands flat on the granite, and I made a decision so quietly that it barely felt like a decision at all. I was done. Not done with the marriage. Not yet, that part would come later. And it would be handled properly, with lawyers and paperwork, and all the care and seriousness it deserved. But I was done with the version of myself that had been shrinking to fit inside the space she'd decided I was allowed to occupy. I was done absorbing. I was done pretending the comments didn't land. I was done being manageable. That night, after everyone had gone home and Marcus was in his room and Claudia had poured herself a glass of wine and settled in front of the television, as though nothing had happened, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop, and I started making a list. It was not an angry list. I want to be very precise about that. It was a practical list. A quiet, methodical, unsentimental inventory of what I had been doing, what I was owed, what I needed to do, and how I was going to do it. Item 1. I contacted a friend named Paul who had retired from corporate HR and had done some consulting work. I told him I was thinking about re-entering the workforce and asked if he'd look at my resume. He said yes without hesitation. Item 2. I reached out to a former colleague named Greg who had left our old company to start a regional distribution operation. We had stayed loosely in touch. I sent him a message that night that said simply, "I'm available if you ever have something that makes sense." Item 3. I opened a personal bank account. Not a joint account. Me own. I transferred the small amount of money I had in a savings fund. I'd been quietly maintaining, nothing dramatic. Just under $9,000. I had accumulated over 3 years from a small monthly allowance Claudia had agreed to when we restructured our finances. It wasn't much. It was mine. Item 4. I called my brother Kevin, who lived 40 minutes away, and told him I needed to talk. We met for coffee the following Tuesday, and I told him everything, not in an emotional way, just clearly and completely. Kevin listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "What do you need from me?" I told him I might need a place to stay for a few weeks at some point. He said his guest room was available whenever I needed it. Item 5. I called a family law attorney named Sandra, whose name I had gotten from a neighbor who had gone through a divorce 2 years earlier. I scheduled a consultation for the following Thursday. I didn't tell Claudia. There was nothing to tell, yet it was a consultation, not a filing. But I needed to understand my position. I needed to know what 11 years of documented household contribution meant in the state of Ohio. As it turned out, it meant quite a bit. I did not change my behavior at home. This is the part people find hardest to believe when I tell this story. I still made dinner every night. I still drove Marcus to school and to practice. I still managed the house exactly as I always had. I did not withdraw. I did not sulk. I did not pick fights. Claudia noticed nothing. That was the thing about the previous 3 years. She had stopped paying close attention to me, which meant that my calm exterior looked exactly like it always had. She had no reason to look beneath it. Week 2. Greg called me back. He had a regional operations manager position, opening up, not glamorous, but solid work with a salary in the mid-70s, which was not where I had been before the severance, but was more than enough to establish financial independence. We talked for an hour. He said he wanted me to come in for a conversation with his partner. I said I'd be there. Week 3. Sandra and I had our second meeting. She had reviewed what I had told her about our finances. Arrangement. The history of the marriage. She was calm and clear, and she laid it out without drama, given the length of the marriage, my documented contributions, and the growth of Claudia's business during the years I had managed the household. I was in a strong position. I was not going to walk away with nothing. The question was how I wanted to approach it: collaborative, mediated, or contested. I told her I preferred to start with mediated. I was not interested in destruction. I was interested in a fair outcome. Week 4. I had the interview with Greg and his partner, a woman named Teresa who was sharp and direct and seemed to size me up accurately within the first 10 minutes. They offered me the position before I had driven home. I accepted contingent on a start date that gave me 2 weeks to settle some personal matters. That same week, I had a conversation with Marcus. This is the part I had been dreading more than anything else. Marcus was 14, old enough to understand, too young to carry it cleanly. And I was acutely aware that how I handled this conversation would matter for a long time. I took him to the diner on Clearwater Avenue, the one we used to go to together on Saturday mornings when he was small. Before Claudia's schedule changed and our routines changed with it, I told him that his mom and I were going to be making some changes. I told him it wasn't his fault, and it was never going to be his fault. I told him that both of us loved him completely, and that was not changing. I told him that I was going to be moving to Uncle Kevin's for a little while, and that he would know exactly how to reach me at all times, and that I would still be at his games and at his school events and available to him whenever he needed me. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Did something happen at my party?" I looked at him across the table. He had seen more than I had realized. I said, "Things had been building for a while. The party was just the last part." He nodded slowly. He didn't cry, though I could see he was working to hold it. I reached across the table and put my hand on his arm, and I told him I was proud of who he was, and that nothing about that was going to change. He said, "Okay, Dad." 2 words. But the way he said them told me he was going to be all right. Week 5. I told Claudia. I waited until Marcus was at a friend's house for the afternoon. I sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where I had made my list 5 weeks earlier, and I asked her to sit down. She came in with her coffee and sat across from me with the mild impatience she had developed for any conversation that felt like it was going to take longer than 2 minutes. I told her I had retained a family law attorney. I told her I had accepted a job offer and would be starting in 10 days. I told her I had made arrangements to stay at Kevin's while we worked through the logistics. I told her I wanted to pursue mediation and that my attorney would be in contact with her. The coffee cup stayed halfway between the table and her mouth for a long moment. Then she said, "You're serious?" I said, "Yes." She set the cup down. I watched her run through something internal, not quite disbelief, not quite grief. Something more complicated than either. There was a moment where I thought she might cry. She didn't. What she said next surprised me. She said, "I didn't think you had it in you. I wasn't sure what to do with that. I still don't. Entirely. I've turned it over a lot in the months since." I think she meant it as an insult. I think some part of her had calculated, maybe unconsciously, that I was too embedded in the life we had built to ever choose to leave it. That my lack of income made me dependent in ways that were structural, not just emotional. She hadn't understood that I had stopped depending on her the moment she told me to go buy my own food. The mediation process took 11 weeks. Sandra was right, I was in a strong position. Claudia's attorney made some early moves that were more aggressive than I thought the situation warranted. But we didn't match the aggression. We stayed measured. We let the documentation speak. In the end, the settlement reflected 11 years of contribution. I received a fair share of the equity in the house, which we agreed to sell. I received a support arrangement that bridged the gap between my new salary and our established standard of living for a period of 2 years less than Sandra thought I could have argued for. But it was what felt right to me. I didn't want to take more than was fair. I wanted the thing to be over. Marcus stayed primarily with Claudia during the school year, with extended time with me on weekends and during breaks. It was not the arrangement I would have chosen, if I could have chosen anything. But it was workable. And it prioritized his stability, which was what mattered. I moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in September. Clean lines. Good light. A kitchen I outfitted carefully, because cooking had become something I genuinely valued. Marcus came over on Friday nights, and we made dinner together and watched whatever he was interested in watching. Those evenings became the anchor of my week. The job with Greg and Teresa turned out to be a better fit than I had expected. The work was demanding in ways that reminded me of what I had liked about my previous career. And being back in a professional environment after 3 years away had an effect I hadn't quite anticipated, I felt. Incrementally. Like a version of myself I had almost forgotten. Renata called me once. About a month after Claudia and I separated, she said she thought about what happened at the party, and she wanted me to know she had told Claudia at the time that what she had said was wrong. I thanked her. I meant it. Claudia and I have not had a long conversation since the mediation concluded. We communicate about Marcus scheduling, school matters, and the logistics of shared parenting, and we do it civilly. I have no anger toward her. That might sound like something people say to seem impressive, but it's genuinely true. I spent too much of my 40s being angry in small ways, absorbing slights and rerouting the hurt somewhere, quieter and more internal. The decision I made that April night was partly a decision to stop doing that. The thing people want to know, when I tell this story, is whether I saw it coming. I did and I didn't. I saw that we had drifted into something unhealthy. I saw that the dynamic had corroded in ways that were starting to feel permanent. I had told myself, more than once, that we would find our way back, that this was a rough patch tied to the stress of her business growth, that things would level out. What I hadn't seen clearly until that Saturday afternoon was that she wasn't suffering through a rough patch. She had arrived somewhere. She had settled into a version of our marriage where I was a utility useful, but not really seen. And she was comfortable there. When she told me to go buy my own food, she wasn't having a bad moment. She was telling me the truth about what she thought of me. I just finally believed her. Marcus turned 15 in April, a year after the party. I took him and 2 of his friends to a baseball game. The Clippers were playing at home, and Marcus had been wanting to go for months. We got good seats, third base line, and ate too much, and stayed through all 9 innings, and drove home with the windows down because it was finally warm enough to do that. On the way back, Marcus said, from the back seat, "Hey, Dad, this was a really good birthday." I said, "Yeah, it was." And I meant it in a way I hadn't meant something that simple in a very long time. Not the version of myself who was shrinking to fit. Not the version who was absorbing in silence. Not the version standing at the kitchen counter with his hands flat on the granite. Just me. On a warm April night, with my son in the back seat. Ready? If you've been in a situation where you felt unseen by someone who was supposed to see you, you already know that the hardest part isn't leaving. It's believing that what you felt was real. It was. You don't have to prove it to anyone. Daniel.